Good morning. We are continuing these videos in this series on how to strategically care for others in the church. And we kind of made a shift in our last video a little bit, thinking more about some particular principles that will help us do it effectively. And we talked about the first thing you got to do is care for your own soul, because if you don't care for yourself, you don't have anything to give anyone else. But I want to give you a second principle for this week, which is you've got to tune your ears and your eyes and your heart into a framework where you can identify with the suffering of others. I want to say that again. Tune your eyes, your ears, and your heart into a sort of framework where you can identify with the suffering of others. It's not just identify the suffering of others. It's not just looking and seeing that they're suffering. You can do that by reading a news story. You can do that by seeing a prayer request come along on a prayer line. You can do that by hearing a story. That's different than identifying with suffering. Caring for one another is not a propositional exercise. It's not an exercise that's driven by knowing a set of facts. It's driven by understanding a set of facts, being able to feel and empathize, and being able to place that within a framework of ministry. So we have all these one another's in Scripture, and they help us along these lines. So here is a one another that I want you to spend this week thinking about. And you can look at it in its context in Galatians 6, but I just want you to think about the one another itself. Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. The law of Christ. That's a way of speaking about the kind of ethic of God's kingdom that is born from the gospel. Now, if we start with the gospel, we start with that which identifies you in your brokenness and moves you from brokenness to blessing. That which took the sufferings of Christ and now allows you in your suffering to be able to walk in victory toward an ultimate destiny, right? So the law of Christ, the central ethic of the kingdom, is rooted in compassion and love. So to bear one another's burdens is to be able to take on the sufferings of another in such a way that their suffering becomes lighter because you are embodying the principles of gospel. You're not the gospel, you're not the message of redemption, but you are an aid to them understanding palpably how that makes its way down and filters down, trickle down into their life and saturates their life on a regular basis. So here's some thoughts about bearing the burdens of another. To bear someone's burden first, you have to understand the nature of their burden. Now, that doesn't come intuitively. Oftentimes, we can be people who don't understand why somebody feels the way they do because we wouldn't feel that way if we were them. Right? You go, I don't get it. I don't understand. If you stay in that framework, you're not tuning your eyes, your ears, your heart to understand as if you were them. So to go into someone's life is to enter into asking this question: what would it be like if I were in their story? How would I feel if I had their background, if I had their wounding, if I had the way that they've been treated, if I had the categories that they had right now in their life? How would I feel? Now, when you think that way, you're sort of getting into their seat, right? You're sort of getting and sitting down in their chair, and you're beginning to look from their perspective and their view. That's different than looking at their view and trying to understand it. So you've got to get in their seat and ask, why are they feeling the way they're feeling? And let yourself feel it a little bit. right? Now, what that does is it texturizes a burden so you can carry it in a responsible way, and in a way that I think is far more productive in ministry to them. Secondly, to bear someone's burden, this may seem obvious, but again, it's something sometimes we have to work toward. You have to care enough about them to take on the burden, right? You got to care enough about them to take on the burden. Years ago, my sister-in-law, who passed away, when she was younger and my wife was younger, they went on a hike with their father and some of their uncles. My sister-in-law had her own pack. She was a preteen, I think, at the time, or maybe 13 or 14 years old. And she couldn't go anymore. She was so tired of hiking, carrying her pack going up the mountain on the East Coast, that she collapsed, fell down, and she was just done. Face first, pack on her back, kind of a humorous setting. She's done. So my father-in-law did is he grabbed her pack. He had his own pack, probably carrying 60 pounds, and then he put hers up on top of his head and on the back of his pack and just trudged up the hill carrying that. That's a good dad. And as he did that, he took on her burden. Why? Because he saw her depleted and knew she's not going another inch. I got to take it on. He cared enough to put her burden on his back. Now, that's just a physical illustration of what we have to do in life. We have to be willing to care enough. And if you don't care enough, what'll happen is you'll try to pick it up, but you'll resent it. And then when you got to go uphill, because you're still going uphill, when you go uphill, you're going to resent the fact that you're carrying their burden in lieu of your own. And that brings us to a third point that's important. To bear that burden, you have to be prepared to carry it in addition to your own load. This is the hard part. You don't get to lay down your burdens and just now all of a sudden carry theirs, because you still have stuff you have to carry. Now, prayer is an important part of this. We cast all our anxieties or cares upon him because he cares for us, which is true. But listen to me. As you bear the burden of your neighbor's crisis, your family member's difficulty, your friend's tension, your child's struggle, and you put that on, you still got to go to work. You still got to pay the bills. You still have your own health dynamic. You still are going to feel some weight. So what happens is you have to be aware of your own capacity and have to recognize what you can take on and can't take on. But you also have to be willing sometimes for a season to stretch a little bit. You don't get to throw away you won't be able to throw away your burden. And this is the danger, is you could end up stumbling. You could end up falling because the weight could be too much for you to bear, right? So in that same context in Galatians 6, Paul's keen to say, you got to carry your own load too. So be careful that you don't take on another's burden and end up falling, because your own load is something you got to carry, right? So understand bandwidth. Understand what it is to care for another and really care for them, and be willing to sit in their seat. Now, I want to give you one final thought that I don't think is talked about too much when it comes to burdens of others. You have to sometimes not take everything personally. Now, here's what I'm getting at. Let me give you Job 6:26, and then I'll explain it. Job 6:26. Think about Job. Life's falling apart. He's in difficult circumstances. He gets friends who come alongside and they are advising him, talking with him, and yet they seem sometimes to not be the best counselors. And Job says this to them: do you think that you can reprove words when the speech of a despairing man is wind? What does Job mean? Do you think that you can reprove words when the speech of a despairing man is wind? Here, I'm going to summarize this for you. I think what Job is saying is, hey guys, sometimes I'm just venting. It doesn't mean that now Job's not accountable for his words or he can say whatever he wants. But it does mean that sometimes you have to take words for what they are. You gotta recognize that the words of a despairing man is wind. Like it just let it blow away sometimes. Don't take everything so personally. You got a family member who's under it and feels weighed down, and they just are struggling, and they just vent. Come with empathy rather than rebuke. Come with kindness rather than reproval. Come just saying, oh, I get it. Okay, let's take that to the Lord together. I get it. How can I help and support you? Don't always be the one who has to bring correction all the time. Now, if there's a cemented path of they're continuing to be, angry and frustrated, and that's their pattern, well, then probably they need you to correct them in love, and they need you to come alongside, and maybe they need a rebuke. But goodness sakes, sometimes we get overrun, and we need some people who walk alongside us and not measure every word we say. Sometimes they're just words for the wind. In summary, you got to sit in their seat. You got to care enough to carry it. You got to know your own bandwidth. And sometimes you just got to have enough empathy to not be critical of everything that's said. Eyes, ears, heart, tuned to the framework of identifying with someone. May the Lord help you do that this week. God bless you as you minister to one another. Take care.